Hi, everyone. My name is Gail Buckland, and I welcome you to the Brooklyn Museum. It's a great museum. I think probably most of you have been here, but if you haven't, First Saturday is really special, and it gets very crowded, and it turns into a real rock and roll party. If you think that this is, you know, two male photographers, I should have had a woman. Last Saturday was all women. I'm sitting right here, a whole women's panel on the image of women in rock. I am delighted that two of the photographers in the exhibition are here this evening because there is no exhibition without the photographers. It's all about them. And I put it together, but if they hadn't been producing, in Bob's case, 40 years of work, and in Justin, 20 years.
Less than that.
A little less than that. You know, we couldn't do it. Bob Gruen is one of the most well-known and respected photographers in rock and roll, period. From Muddy Waters to the Rolling Stones, Elvis to Madonna, Bob Dylan to Bob Marley, John Lennon to Johnny Rotten, he's captured the music scene for over 40 years in photographs that have gained worldwide recognition. You have all seen a Bob Gruen photograph, and you don't have to go to the 5th floor to see the show. You have already seen Bob Gruen's work. Shortly after John Lennon moved to New York in 1971, Bob became John and Yoko's personal photographer and friend, making photographs of their working life as well as their private moments. In 1974, he created iconic images of John Lennon wearing a New York City t-shirt and standing in front of the Statue of Liberty, making the peace sign, two of the most popular Lennon images of all time. Bob has worked with major rock acts such as Led Zeppelin, The Who, David Bowie, Tina Turner, Elton John, Aerosmith, everybody. As chief photographer for Rock Scene magazine in the 70s, Bob specialized in candid, behind-the-scenes photo features. He toured extensively with the emerging punk and new wave bands, including the New York Dolls, Sex Pistols, Clash, Ramones, Patti Smith, and Blondie. Justin was born in Justin Borucki. This is Bob. I don't know, they look about the same age. Can you tell which one's older, which one's, you know? I'm closer to Bob's age. Justin has two fabulous photographs in the exhibition, and he's one of my discoveries. I feel very proud and honored to have him in. I know he really enjoys being in a show with so many of the people he really looks up to. He started taking photographs at 16 when he took a high school photo course. Apparently he wanted to photograph punk in Staten Island. I don't know if the camera got you in free or, anyway, he can tell us. But this is in the early 90s. Justin started photography, and then he went to FIT and studied photography there and became a photo editor of Guitar World and Revolver, all the time continuing to photograph musicians, Lenny Kravitz, Rihanna, Metallica. He's done a lot for in less than 20 years. So the way we're going to structure this evening is Bob Gruen has a slideshow, I guess it's called a PowerPoint presentation these days, that has been a little cut down for our agenda because we want to have a discussion afterwards and also open it up to questions. So I now turn it over to Bob Gruen.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Gruen. As she said, I'm a photographer. I live in New York City, and I've made a career photographing rock and roll musicians. And I don't just visit the rock and roll lifestyle as a journalist. I live it, and I enjoy it. I've worked with a lot of powerful artists who have inspired the world, and I've helped promote their image. It's important to me to relate the passion and the feeling of what's going on, and my path has been through rock and roll. There's often a feeling of anarchy when thousands of people are gathered, each free and expressing themselves in their own way, with 4 or 5 musicians at the center. For me, nothing compares to the chaotic excitement you get when you're in the middle of a live, loud crowd. And rock and roll for me has always been about the freedom to express your feelings loudly. Some people like to have music playing in the background when they work. I like it in the foreground. One of my earliest memories was when I was 5 years old in summer camp, and I refused to get out of bed to go to the early morning flag raising because I didn't want to. I said it's a free country and I can do what I want. And I felt like that all my life, and I still don't like to get up early. I was in my early teens in the 1950s when popular music started getting faster and louder, and news reports warned of the danger of this new sound, this rock and roll. It seemed it was stirring up passionate feelings in people, and the authorities were afraid of that because it couldn't be controlled. I enjoy being from New York, and I used to wear a shirt like this all the time. I got several of them at a time from guys who sold them on the street in Times Square. I used to get them from my friends, and one day I gave one to John Lennon. I'm most well known for taking this photo done on the rooftop terrace of John's apartment in New York City in 1974. He had asked me to take some photos for his new album, For the Walls and Bridges, in a quick and simple way, so he didn't have to interrupt his recording schedule. He wanted different photos of his face so you could make up different expressions by flipping these cutout strips. I put some white paper on a wall of his penthouse terrace, and we did a series of shots. Then we took a few more pictures to use as publicity, and after I suggested that the shirt I had given him a year earlier would be perfect with the skyline around us, he went and put it on, and we took these shots. We had no idea it would become as well known as it has, and I'll explain how I got to do this. I grew up outside of New York City. My mom and dad were lawyers, and I learned to question everything. I learned that no is not an answer to accept, but can be the beginning of an interesting conversation. My dad said it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Photography was my mom's hobby, and she taught me to develop and print my own photos. I took an immediate liking to photography, and when I was 8 years old, my parents gave me my first camera, a Kodak Brownie Hawkeye. The first concert I saw was Pete Seeger, folk singer, who played at my local high school. I was 13, and I thought it was the most interesting, powerful, and fun experience I ever had. He sang about peace and love and freedom for all. He sang songs asking for equality for workers, and I remember the song Little Boxes, criticizing a lack of individuality. He encouraged the audience to sing along, and everyone had fun. He was singing about all the things I had been taught were morally right, but within a week there were letters in the local newspapers fiercely attacking him as an anti-American communist and condemning the school system for allowing him to perform. I was shocked because at the concert he wasn't against anything except narrow-minded bigotry. It was my first experience with an artist who delivered his so-called dangerous message in such a disarming and entertaining way. It became my favorite kind of music with a message. I like to take pictures of exciting things. When I was 12, the local town newspaper used this photo of a fire. It was the first time a photo of mine was published. I took photos for the school newspapers of football and other school events, and when I went to my high school prom, I took my camera instead of a date. I went to several colleges, including Southern Illinois University, where I again worked for the school daily newspaper, and I took this photo of the only way out of town, which is where I wanted to go. A sociology teacher in the Baltimore Community College told me that I belonged in Greenwich Village, and I soon found out that he was right. I've been there ever since. I was listening to Bob Dylan, Tom Paxton, Phil Oakes, and the other rabble-rousers of the folk movement, and I got my first photo pass at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965 when Bob Dylan famously played with an electric rock band. To me, it was a declaration that rock and roll was the folk music of America. It said that many people booed, but actually it was not as simple as that, as there were as many people cheering as booing, some just yelling at each other in the seats. People seemed really afraid of any kind of change, of anything being different. The musicians I like sing about social politics, not only lust and desire like most pop music. Lonely Teenager by Dion is far simpler than Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. And though I appreciate both, Dylan has a stronger impact on our cultural psyche. And Dylan has been a big influence on my life. In the 1960s, when I was trying to explain to my mom how I felt, I played Bob Dylan's It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. I'm not sure if she got it, but I know I did. And I like Dylan because every time I hear a song, I have different thoughts. And the meaning is just what it makes you think about. There's nothing really to figure out for me. I'm a huge fan, but I've never really had a chance to talk to him. The one time he spoke to me was after I sneaked my cameras into a few of his Rolling Thunder tour shows where I took this photo. He wasn't allowing any photography, but I was driven to cover it as a news story. I happened to meet him several months later on the street, and he told me he wanted to beat me up. He was angry that I had taken photos without permission and published them. For me, it was like meeting God and finding out he wanted to kill me. Well, speaking of Bob, a funny thing happened actually when I photographed George Harrison at Madison Square Garden. And I went to the after party in the Plaza Hotel with his agent and his drummer, who were both good friends of mine. As we walked in, my friends took a few steps towards the bar, and I stood and looked around the room. And George came in, and he looked around the room full of people, and he said, "Who are these people?" And turning to me, he said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Bob Gruen." And he said, "You're not Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's a friend of mine. Throw him out." And before I could say another word, I was out and pushed out in the hall. But back to my beginnings. I had a number of jobs before I was able to pay my rent as a photographer. I was Santa Claus one Christmas. I baked Belgian waffles at the New York World's Fair. I also took photos of babies, and I took photos of paintings from museums for a company that made the slides for them. I was really bad with the babies, and the art photography was really boring, but I did learn a lot about how color film works and trying to get the colors of the paintings just right. My family had always wanted me to get a real job, feeling that photography was a good hobby, but not really a good career. But in those days, there was a theory that people should turn on, tune in, and drop out. And I did. Little did I know that by dropping out would actually be my road to success. By the late 60s, I knew I wasn't cut out for a 9-to-5 job because I just wasn't able to make the 9 o'clock part. This is a picture I took in the middle of the night with a full moon. It was a long exposure, and I walked in and I sat for a while, and then I quickly got out. So you can see right through me. I keep in mind the idea that we're all spirits and we're all just passing through here. Anyway, I had to be independent and work for myself. I was living with a rock band, first known as the Justice League and later as the Glitter House. They were discovered by Bob Gruen, who had them sing vocals on the soundtrack of the Barbarella movie, and they got a record contract. And the record company used my photos and started to hire me to photograph other groups. And I took a photo class at the Fashion Institute in New York, where I learned some studio techniques, and I made this high contrast photo which I used for my business card. My photo references and influences include Man Ray for making art with photography, Henry Cartier-Bresson for catching the decisive moment, and Arthur Felig, known as Ouija, for being in the right place at the right time. And, I've been bothered all my life by people who want my photos to be sharper and better in focus, but I feel that sometimes when the subject isn't sharp, the feelings are more clear. I went with a few friends who said I must see Ike and Tina Turner, and I took some pictures. At the end of the show, there was a strobe light flashed, and I set my camera for a 1-second exposure, and took several shots like that, as the strobe light caught different parts of Tina dancing. And this one came out just right, and I think it's one of my best. A few days later, I took the pictures with me to show my friends when we met at another Ike and Tina show. As I was showing them the photos, Ike walked in and he walked by, and one of my friends literally pushed me in front and said, "Show Ike the photos." And he liked them a lot, and he told me to come to more shows, and soon I was traveling with them. I had the first video recorder available, the Sony Portapack, and I taped many of the shows for Ike and Tina. Tina liked that I could show it in the hotel room after the show, and she would point out the mistakes that the Ikeettes would make. My first album cover was for Ike and Tina in 1971, and this led to many introductions and new contacts. I had been using my dad's Minolta, but I finally got a good Nikon camera. The first night I had it, I went to Madison Square Garden to photograph a rock and roll revival show. I was standing on a seat trying to get a shot of Chuck Berry kissing his guitar when a guard started yelling at me to get off the seat. He literally lifted me up, and before he dropped me down in the aisle, I got this shot from just the right angle. A publicist hired me to photograph a new piano player from England who was just starting a solo career, Elton John. He liked my photos and had me photograph the next several trips to New York. And this shot of Elton John at Carnegie Hall was made using a star filter, which turns the spotlight into a flaring star effect, something I often did to make photos as exciting as the performers, and Elton certainly is one wild and exciting guy. And I met the manager for LaBelle, and I made 3 album covers for them. The manager, Vicky Wickham, chose unusual places for our photo shoots, like the roller coaster at Coney Island, which I tried, but I couldn't ride backwards to get the photos. These pictures were taken at the Lodi, New Jersey Boys Club gym. In 1972, I was included in the first book of rock photography, and the writer for the book asked me to come with him when he interviewed John Lennon and Yoko Ono for a story about their backup band, The Elephant's Memory. I met him at a hotel where they were doing the interviews, and he said, "John and Yoko just woke up and didn't know that I was bringing a photographer. They're a little cranky, but they'll wake up some more and they'll feel better, and they'll let you come up, and you'll take photos of John and Yoko, and they'll like your photos, and they'll like you, and you'll probably become friends, and you'll take photos for album covers because that's the way they are." And that's what happened. I said, I'll be in the bar. You let me know when you're ready. And he came out and got me about 20 minutes later, and as I was walking down the hall to meet John and Yoko, I realized I was shaking because I was so nervous. And I knew I wouldn't be able to take pictures shaking like that. So I stopped and I took a deep breath, and I said to myself that it would only be all right if I was myself. And I went in with some confidence, and I got this shot of him. Since the story we were working on was about the Elephant's Memory Band, I asked if I could come along to the recording studio that night and get some photos with them, and they said that would be all right. At the end of the night, I took this photo of all of them together. And several weeks later, they contacted me and asked if they could use it in the package for their Sometime in New York City album. And after that, I started to work with them more often. They were the kind of artists that I really admire, encouraging people to think about peace and love. And like Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan, they were constantly attacked for their views. The first rock concert I had seen was the Rolling Stones at the Academy of Music in New York in 1965. It was the most exciting show I ever experienced. I was an immediate fan, and I have been ever since. And I met Lisa Robinson, who was a music columnist for the New York Post and syndicated to 175 other newspapers. And she was also the editor of Rock Scene magazine. She was a very important person in the music business, and she got me many photo passes in my career. It was Lisa who got me my first photo pass for the Rolling Stones at Madison Square Garden in '72, where I took this picture. For me, they've always been the image of rock and roll. But I worked with a lot of groups that were considered dangerous. The New York Dolls frightened people because they pushed the accepted boundaries. They dolled themselves up, not as transvestites, but as beautiful men looking for a kiss. When asked if they were bisexual, David Johansen, their leader, answered, "No, we're trisexual. We'll try anything." In fact, they were the most macho group of guys I've hung out with, and they attracted more groupies than any of the others. I started traveling with them, and I shot their second album cover. And I made a lot of videos for them. And we've just released a DVD titled All Dolled Up, the collection of those videos. And my latest book is about the New York Dolls, who influenced so many of the bands that came after them. It's got 230 pictures, interviews with the surviving members, David Johansen and Sylvain, and an afterword by Morrissey. Throughout the book, there are quotes by many rock and rollers collected by Legs McNeil, the author of Please Kill Me, the Bible of punk rock. I met the Dolls because they had the same management as the Elephant's Memory. And Aerosmith had the same management too, Steve Lieber and David Krebs. They sent me to Boston to photograph Aerosmith when they were just starting to become popular, and I'm still friends with them today. In fact, it's a long story, but one of my assistants married Brad Whitford, who she met while she was working for me. As an independent freelance person, you answer only to yourself, but you wake up every day unemployed. You can choose what you want to do, but often the pressures of life's expenses causes you to take on jobs solely for the money, like these. But that's a choice too. I got work from a lot of record companies doing trade shots and publicity photos for hundreds of bands. And that was my rent money. I photographed a lot of different events, groups big and small, day and night. Usually I was paid about $75 or $100 per job, sometimes a little more. The early album cover jobs went for only $300. Magazines like Cream or the NME just paid $25 or $35 a photo, so I had to work a lot to pay my bills. But a lot of groups I just did for fun, new groups that didn't have any money. My outlet for this was Rock Scene magazine, edited by Lisa Robinson. Rock Scene was something we all did for free, like a fanzine. It was distributed by a publisher who made mostly comic books, so you'd find it in candy stores rather than at newsstands. For Rock Scene, we did photos about the whole rock lifestyle, and we didn't limit our stories to groups that were known, but rather the groups that we found interesting. The pages of Rock Scene were alive with photos of touring and backstage parties. And we were underground, outside the system, with funky distribution, but we inspired people, many of whom have since come up to me and said that after reading Rock Scene, they left home and moved to New York because we made it look like so much fun. And that always makes me feel good. Living the rock lifestyle, I became friends with many of the musicians I met, and I could take photos of them in casual settings. A lot of bands I worked with were not famous when I met them, and I was able to record their early moments. I got to know the Ramones when they couldn't even afford guitar cases. I worked with many big-name bands, too. Led Zeppelin had their own tour plane when I met them. Lisa Robinson called me one day to say we were going to Pittsburgh with Led Zeppelin. When we got to the airport, Robert Plant asked me to take a picture of the band with their plane. This photo is on the first roll of film I took of them, and it's one of the most well-known pictures of Led Zeppelin. It really sums up the excesses of the rock lifestyle of the 70s. For me, it was hard to photograph Led Zeppelin because they played in very low light, sometimes only lit by lasers, and I had to use very long exposures. and I only photographed a few shows, but my photos of them are very popular. I relate to things visually. For me, if this is show business, there should be a show to see. Alice Cooper always acts out each song in a highly dramatic way, and he's really great fun to see. When Salvador Dali wanted to make a hologram of the brain of the pop star, he chose Alice as his model. I remember this is one of the most interesting photo sessions I ever had. Dali was carrying on about the art of Confucianism, that nothing is ever really understood, and Alice was wearing $2 million worth of real diamonds, protected by a large thug with a machine gun. The holograms are now in the Dali Museum in Florida and Spain, where you can buy a postcard of this photo. And a lot of the bands I worked with were very wild. One time my dad bragged to a friend of his that I was in Japan working with the rock band Kiss. Instead of being impressed, however, his friend was shocked and said that Kiss advocated wanton sex, drugs, and rock and roll, meaning all that was wrong and that they were a threat to society. When my dad asked me if this is true, I didn't know what to say. I mean, personally, I like sex and rock and roll, and I don't think that's a threat to society. I don't advocate drug use, and neither does Kiss for that matter, but I think there should be room for fun in a free world. Cream magazine asked me to make a photo comic story about Kiss. The band members dressed in suits at the beginning of the story, and they changed into Kiss to save the world. It was a funny little story, and I made up the photos on the spur of the moment without any advanced planning other than the rough plot. When the band saw the photos, they liked this one so much they made it the cover of their album. They called it Dress to Kill, and it won several awards for album design. Cream magazine started a regular centerfold feature called The Cream Dream, and for the first one, I photographed Todd Rundgren as the Venus de Milo. It was pretty different in the days before Photoshop, and an artist had to actually paint with an airbrush on a photo print to make the broken arm on the left. When Todd came for the photo session, he brought a gold lame suit he got from the famous Hollywood designer, Nudie, the same style suit that Nudie made for Elvis Presley. He also brought along his new girlfriend, model Bebe Buell. After that initial meeting, Bebe and I became fast friends. Some years later, Bebe brought her daughter, Liv Tyler, to my studio to have some photos taken so she could find an agent for her. Liv soon became one of the top models in the world, and she's now, of course, a very successful actress. I had my first solo exhibition in 1974 at the Art Barn in Greenwich, in Connecticut. Photography was only just beginning to be considered an art form back then, and now, of course, continues to grow in popularity and value, as witnessed by the amazing show here in the Brooklyn Museum, Who Shot Rock and Roll, thanks to the intensive research of our curator and my host, art historian Gail Buckland. And I'm honored to be part of this impressive collection at one of the world's most prestigious art museums. I've always hoped to get recognition as an artist, not just to have my images published as news. My motto has always been Ars Gratia Pecunica, which is art for the sake of money. A creative person wants to make art, but you have to pay your rent. Later that summer, Yoko Ono took me on my first trip to Japan to photograph her music tour of 10 cities. I met many high-level people in the music business there, and I've had a long, close relationship with Japan ever since. One magazine liked my photos so much they dedicated an entire issue to my work, and the cover design was so good I used it as my business card for the next several years. The President of the United States, Richard Nixon, wanted to deport John Lennon. And what was his crime? He dared to speak of peace in a time of war. I believed in the ideas of John and Yoko, and one of the main reasons I wanted to help them was that I felt their message of peace and love was so important. I wanted to take photos of John in front of the Statue of Liberty to dramatize his case, the statue being a symbol of welcome to a country whose government was trying to determine to throw him out. I was thrilled that John agreed with me to take the picture, but surprised that after we'd done it, not that many news outlets published it, being afraid to be involved with John's political case. After he died in 1980, the picture became more popular. And I think this is because a lot of people relate to John Lennon as a symbol of personal freedom, similar to the Statue of Liberty. People think I'm lucky because I worked with so many famous artists and bands, but I worked with thousands of bands that didn't make it and never would. The luck was that a few of them did become successful, like Debbie Harry here. And there's always been a bit of luck of timing in my life, and I seem to be at the right place at the right time pretty often. And one bit of luck in my life came when I told my brother I needed a car, but I only had a few $100s. He found this 54 Buick Special for me for only $300, and I had a real rock and roll car. But mostly I got around town first on a bicycle and later on this moped because it was faster, and I always had to make deadlines. There's a lot of worry involved with being a free agent. trying to get to every place you can, trying to get to pay the rent, going without sleep for days. Sometimes it's really hard. But as Winston Churchill said, when you're going through hell, you should keep going. I crave peace and quiet, but I thrive in chaos. John Lennon had taken time off to be with his son, Sean. When Sean was only 1 month old, John called me and asked me to come and take some photos to send to his family. He seemed happier than I had ever seen him, and he stayed away from public life for the next 5 years. I was hired to photograph the Bay City Rollers, who were hugely popular with young, screaming teenage girls, and I made more money off of them than any other group I worked with. Magazines would buy 1 Blondie shot, maybe 2 Rolling Stones, and 45 Bay City Roller photos to make a whole issue just about them. When the Rollers came to New York, they wanted to meet John Lennon. And I asked John if and he said if they were still together as a group in 5 years, he'd meet him then. I asked him if he had any advice that he could give him, and he said, tell them to get all the money now in their own names, which was very good advice, and they should have taken it because in the end, they never did get what was due to them. I was working more and more regularly, and rock and roll was becoming more and more mainstream. My photos started to appear on many magazine covers, and I was getting work with a lot of well-known bands. This is me in my studio in 1977. I got the BG letters when the Fillmore East Theater in New York closed, and I found them on the street. For me, the letters stand not only for Bob Gruen, but for Bill Graham, the greatest rock show promoter, who founded the Fillmore Theaters and was the first to develop the arena rock shows. On the wall of Bill's office, he had an engraved plaque with his motto. It said, "Don't give the audience what they want. Give them what they should want." Now, the Sex Pistols caused a real commotion when they used a common curse word on public TV, and they were widely condemned for it. They were just a rock and roll band, but people made such a big deal about it. I met their creator, Malcolm McLaren, in New York when he sold some clothes to the New York Dolls. In 1976, I went to England for the first time, and his was the only phone number I had. Malcolm took me to a nightclub where I met many of the people who became the punk scene in England, and he encouraged me to photograph the Sex Pistols, who seemed obnoxious at first, but are in fact nice guys and pretty funny once you get to know them. On this trip, I also met The Clash, and I was blown away by the power of their performance. I saw that they had a profound commitment to work for a better world, and they encouraged people to know your rights, and began one song with the phrase, "What are you going to do now?" They say the Sex Pistols made people want to scream with rage, but The Clash gave people the reasons. I prefer people who are seeking solutions rather than just complaining about problems. John Lennon said there are no problems, only solutions. The Clash became my favorite band, and I got to be good friends with them when they came to record in New York. And I went on 2 tours across America with them. I also went across America with the Sex Pistols on their tour bus. And while the shows were pure mayhem, it was actually pretty mellow on the bus, mostly beer and reggae music. But when the door opened, all hell broke loose. They were young, arrogant, and very free, saying whatever they felt, and many people were insulted by their attitude and their rude behavior. But I must say that they did have some idea of what they were doing. When Sid and I were having a hot dog one day, I picked up a camera to take a photo, and he said, "Wait." Then he put more mustard and ketchup on his hot dog, and he smeared it on his face to match his button. He was a mess, but he knew how to express it. This photo is now in the permanent collection of the National Portrait Gallery in London, having been chosen by David Bowie as one of the 10 great personalities of the 20th century. In the 70s, I continued to photograph as many rock shows as I could. I saw Bob Marley several times. He was amazing and inspiring in a spiritual way, one that was fun and made people want to dance and feel good. And I really like this picture because of the red, green, and gold Rasta colors. I asked John, in 1980, John and Yoko came back into the studios making a new album, and they asked me to come to photograph them that summer. I often stopped by during the fall while they were mixing their Double Fantasy album. And this photo was taken on John and Sean's birthday, October 9th. It looks like John is showing Sean the wonder of the recording world, but he's really showing me that the new computerized control panel will mix the playback and move the volume controls by itself. In December, I took some more photos, including this one. I had taken a few of them standing in front of the guitar when John pushed Yoko against the wall and said, "Take one like this. This is what everybody wants to see." John was very happy that their album was moving up the charts and selling well, so he was planning a world tour. A few days later, he was shot. This was one of the biggest losses I ever experienced, and it's not something you can get over. Though eventually you get used to it, and you learn to go on. Tina Turner got over her breakup from Mike, and she started a solo career. In 1982, she had a big comeback show at the Ritz in New York. David Bowie and Keith Richards were there to cheer her on, and it was great to see her doing so well on her own. Now, many people consider The Clash the only band that really mattered, and I'm one of them. And after they broke up in the early 80s, I wasn't as interested in touring with bands anymore. With the advent of MTV and the music business becoming so corporate, bands started to controlling their image a lot more, and it was harder to gain access to photograph them and to hold on to the rights to license the photos. I started to work more on books and exhibitions of my work. In 1982, I had a big exhibition of my work at a party at Studio 54, and in 1985, I published Listen to These Pictures, my first book of photos of John Lennon. At another exhibition of my work, Yoko Ono came with her son Sean and my friend Keith Haring. He's a very cool guy, and he made art that makes people feel good. Keith made a drawing of me one time, which I've used ever since on my business card. I continued to photograph major rock events. Tina Turner was one of the big stars of the Live Aid concerts in 1985, which I covered. And in the 1980s, they started the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in 1988, I got this picture of Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, and Mick Jagger in the after-show jam. And in 1988, a Japanese publisher released a book of my Rolling Stones pictures called The Rolling Stones featuring Keith Richards. They were thinking more about Keith as the force behind the Stones music, and they put a photo of Keith and Tina Turner on the cover. It was released just as Keith released his first solo album, so the timing was good, and he was happy to be featured on the book. He hired me to shoot several of his shows and his press party where this picture was taken. During his solo shows that followed, I saw a spiritual side of Keith that I hadn't been aware of before. He seemed to be coming into his own more as a musician. In 1989, I was along on the MTV plane to Russia with Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and Ozzy Osbourne for the Moscow Music Peace Festival, an anti-drug and alcohol abuse benefit. And everybody on that tour knew a lot about alcohol and drug abuse. It was a weird trip for me to be in a strange land with some strange bands. In 1995, Genesis Books in England published a super deluxe limited edition book of my Lennon photos. Titled Sometime in New York City, it was numbered and signed by me and Yoko Ono. I was having more exhibits in London and New Orleans and in Washington, D.C., where I gave a talk at the Smithsonian Institute. I made another limited edition book for Genesis Publications, Crossfire Hurricane, with my Rolling Stones photos, which sold out in just a few months. Now, I felt I had to be there when the Sex Pistols had their 20th anniversary reunion concert in Finsbury Park in London in '96. More people were there than I'd ever seen them in all the shows that they had played when they started. And they were great. They play Sex Pistols songs better than anybody. But Iggy Pop opened the show, and he was a tough act to follow, Iggy being one of the most intense performers in rock and roll. He's an animal on stage, but backstage he's just charming. As you can see by the way Kate Moss is looking at him, and the wary look in Johnny Depp's eyes. None too happy about the way his girlfriend was looking at Iggy. Now, the Fun-Loving Criminals, for their King of New York record, wanted to make a photo just like the one Jimi Hendrix record, Electric Ladyland, with a group of naked women. The band rounded up all the girls they knew who would do it, and my wife wanted to know what was up. I told her the only people allowed there were me, my assistants, the art director, and a few women stylists who and the women in the photos. No one would be just hanging out and watching. But she insisted, so I said if she wanted to come, she'd have to be in the picture. And she agreed, and I got to go home with the prettiest girl in the shoot. I released a book of my Clash photos with an exhibition in London in 2001. Titled simply The Clash, the limited edition hardcover sold out quickly, but the softcover is still available. Joe Strummer and Mick Jones came to the opening party in 2001 in London. Mick later said how impressed he was that 25 years after they recorded their songs, 20-year-old kids came up to him to tell him how inspired they were by The Clash. Joe Strummer and I became very good friends, and in the 80s he stayed with me, sleeping on my couch when he was in New York. I had a great time hanging out with him and going to the shows of his new band, the Mescaleros. My wife and I would have to remember to bring our sunglasses when we went out to dinner with Joe Strummer, because we'd always be up all night, and when you walk out of a bar at 8 a.m., you need your shades. The last time Joe was in town, we ended up the night dancing on tables at a downtown restaurant. He died of a heart attack a month later. He was a very powerful spirit, a voice of his generation, and I miss him very much. When the Rolling Stones announced their tour in the spring of 2002, I shot the event with film as usual, but also with the newly available higher quality digital camera. I took the chip back to my agency and dropped the film at the lab to be developed. By the time I got home 20 minutes later, my photos were on the agency website and were being seen around the world. I almost forgot to pick up the slides the next day because the job was done by having the digital scans out on the web already. A few months later, I had a photo session with Ryan Adams. We had been planning it for a while, but kept putting it off until the night before a deadline to get a shot of him at a recording studio to Rolling Stone magazine. My friends at the Electric Lady Studio let me use the place, and we shot a lot of digital pictures. Then went back to my studio, took some more photos, and then we looked at them all on the computer. Ryan picked out what he liked, and before he was in a taxi going home, the photos had been sent over the internet to Rolling Stone, and the job was done. And I've been using the Canon digital cameras ever since. I spent a lot of time with my friend, singer-songwriter Jesse Malin, and I took a photo of him with his idol, Bruce Springsteen, who's on Jesse's latest CD. Jesse runs a couple of nightclubs in New York, the Niagara Bar on 7th Street and the new Bowery Electric at Joey Ramone Place. Check him out if you get into the city, and tell him I sent you. Today, Green Day is my current favorite, and I was very surprised when Green Day album, American Idiot, became such a worldwide success. Their songs were about the same kind of ideas, raging against the system's lack of opportunity and hypocrisy and lack of freedom that the punks have been royally attacked for. But here's Green Day receiving all kinds of awards for the same sentiments, and I think that's great progress. There seems to be a thread of social commentary coming from folk music through rock and roll that continues today. When people tell me that I must have led an exciting life, I say yes, and I still do. If you want to live an exciting life, you just have to get up and go out of your house and do it. I still go out all the time to see shows, and I take pictures that I post on my website, bobgruen.com. I still like a show that inspires people to get up and shout. This photo of Courtney Love shows that she wasn't about to stop just because she had spent the previous night in jail. And in 2005, my book, John Lennon, The New York Years, was published. For this one, I worked really hard on the text. In it, I tell what it was like to be John Lennon's friend in New York and the changes that he went through, from drunk pop star to attentive father and house husband. As you can see, Green Day likes it, and you can see they have a sense of humor. And one of the funnier photo shoots I've done recently was when the Finnish band Lordi, they've won the Eurovision contest, the best of 45 countries, but they're not known in the U.S. I took them to the middle of Times Square, and we couldn't even get a sidelong look from the cops. You have to be more than weird to get attention in New York. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened an annex in New York City with a lot of my photos in the exhibits and a big party featuring Debbie Harry. The current exhibit, organized by Yoko Ono, showcases John Lennon and features several of my photos, and I highly recommend a visit. It's a really beautiful exhibit. A recent excitement I did was a 6-page spread in the French magazine Rock and Folk for the AC/DC tour last year. Now, 28 years ago, I took a photo of the Clash on the roof of the RCA building, where you're on top of New York City. And now I've come full circle. When I heard that Green Day was going to be taping a TV show in the RCA building, I suggested to them that we could go up on the roof and take a photo in the same place as their favorite group, and they agreed. The roof had been closed to the public for many years, but it's open again now. For me, it was a great homecoming to the old spot with my favorite new group. So check out my website, bobgruen.com, for updates on where I've been and what I'm doing. And I really want to thank you for having me here today, and I want to thank the Brooklyn Museum of Art for this great opportunity. And I'd like to introduce my mother, who's down here in the front. Mom, if you just want to turn around and wave a little bit. This is the woman who taught me photography. Mom, just hold your hand up down here. Okay. I owe it all today. She's 96 years old. She's been practicing as a lawyer for the last 64 years, and actually we just finally convinced her to retire last spring. But mostly I want to thank Gail for putting on this exhibit and for inviting me to be here today. And when Gail walked into my studio, she told me she doesn't really know about rock and roll, but she knows everything about photography. You know, in her introduction, they mentioned the books about Talbot and the printmaking, but some of Gail's books are textbooks of photography. She's known around the world, and like I say, she didn't know much about rock and roll, but she certainly knows about it now. And being able to deal with the more than 100 rock and roll photographers, many of whom are very cranky because we've been ripped off all our lives and we don't trust anybody, and we all ended up trusting Gail, and we all thank her for this fantastic exhibit. And I think now I'm going to join Gail and Justin, and we're going to have a little conversation.
I think another round of applause for Bob. That was amazing. what a whirlwind tour. And as a historian, you know, my heart just keeps on pumping, but now I have this really new affection for Bob and what he's done and contributed. I want to introduce again Justin Borucki, because when the museum asked me to have, you know, an evening event for the first Saturday, and I said, oh, I'd love to get Bob Gruen, you know, he has wonderful stories, wonderful pictures, and it will be fabulous. They said, well, that would be great, but get somebody who's younger, because not that he's over the top.
I'm young at heart.
No, it's just because the industry has changed so much. It's just because that thing, the way that Bob started, and he told his story and how he progressed, things were different when Justin began in the early 90s. And I just would like to know, what were the opportunities you had, and what were the biggest obstacles, and start from that.
Okay. Well, it started with me just basically photographing my friends' bands play locally, you know, in Staten Island, in New York, in Brooklyn, Manhattan. And it just kind of escalated, you know, getting in touch with fanzines and small labels, and sooner or later, you know, you start getting paid. Later, you know.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, and you know, and you just kind of keep on going with it. And I didn't really have a lot of obstacles in the beginning. It was just, you know, I just worked hard. You know, just always went to shows and always, you know, made new friends and just kept on photographing and shooting and shooting and shooting and spending my waking hours in a dark room and then going out at night to shows, and you know, just kept on going with that.
And could you earn a living at it?
Well, at the time, I, you know, lived at home with my mom, you know. Hi, Mom.
Okay, we have to applaud another mom.
You know, I lived at home with Mom, and, you know, just worked odd jobs at camera stores, and went to college for photography, and ended up working, got a photo editing job for a magazine, and that really opened the doors for me to start to get to know the labels and the publicists and all of that stuff, which allowed me to quit and then make a living.
Yeah. Did you always want to photograph musicians?
Yes.
Was that you?
At first, it was photography was just kind of fell into my lap. Like I had no more art class to take in high school, and the last elective was photography. It's like, all right, it sounds fun, let's do it. And I just kind of fell in love with it immediately, and then it just kind of naturally fell into place because I was already going to shows, and then I started bringing the camera to shows, and
you were allowed to bring your camera?
Yeah, it was just, you know, small shows. You know,
small.
Yeah.
CBGB.
There's two CBGBs, you know.
Yeah.
There was anyone could bring a camera in there, you know.
That's why some of the best photographs in the exhibition are from CBGBs.
Yeah.
No one is in their 20s in my exhibition, but if there was someone from their 20s, they would have grown up with MTV and the computer. Justin said he didn't actually get cable till he was 18. Shucks. Because
Sorry.
my question was going to be, what was it like, you know, starting at the age of 14, perhaps, watching MTV? The reason I'm raising this as a question is that if any of you saw the New York Times review, which was kind of, a lot of the photographers are angry, including Bob and, you know, many of them, because it concludes by saying, after seeing all these phenomenal still photographs that are so expressive, so powerful, something you can really hold on to, because a still photograph does register in your mind in a way that the moving image doesn't. The New York Times reviewer said, yeah, but the best way of conveying rock and roll is video. And so this is a question I want to ask both Bob and Justin about what they see as the power of the still image. And just one comment, a very, very eminent musician sent me an email after reading the New York Times review, and he said, I've always been pretty anti-video when it comes to music. I have frequently said in interviews, etc., that music is purely an auditory phenomena, should not be connected with some director's view of the song. Videos are okay sometimes, but one should have their own personal mental images take precedence when listening to a familiar song, and videos that create these images for the listener are psychically confining at best. One of my points in doing the exhibition is to say that rock and roll was a bipartite revolution. It was sound and image. And both these artists have helped, and you saw this very much in Bob's presentation, the image of rock. And I just want you to, maybe Bob first and then Justin, talk about your contribution in disseminating the image of rock and why the still photograph is important.
Well, we had a lot discussion about that Times article, because the Times is an important place, and I think my wife made a comment that the best part of the article is that you've made this exhibit and it brings up this conversation. That for years people have been saying that rock and roll photography is not art. And as I said in my talk, I've always felt that I wanted to relate as an artist like Man Ray or Cartier-Bresson, and then people say, oh, rock and roll, well, that's not art. No matter how exciting or how powerful the image is. And in his article, he even compares it to fashion photography. He says, well, fashion is art because they're not celebrities, but rock and roll is not because you know the personalities. I took offense because fashion was not art 20 years ago. People were outraged that a fashion photographer would consider it art. And the main point is that the rock people are not celebrities until you see them in a photo, until they become popular, until their image gets to be well known, and that's all through photography. Yeah. But, you mentioned the video part. I actually got an email as well. I mean, Chris was totally right in what he said. I feel that too. I think Bruce Springsteen was the last holdout. He refused to make a video because music is meant to be imagined in your mind. You hear a song, you imagine your own story. You shouldn't be locked into some video director's idea that that is the story of the song. There are many stories to songs. John Lennon used to tell me he didn't know what his songs meant until he read the reviews and found out what people were thinking about him. But as far as growing up in the video age, we say, well, that guy's young, he grew up in the video age. I got an email from a 21-year-old art student, Ashley Beliveau, and she says here, so I read that New York Times article, whoever wrote it is an idiot. The last line, but nothing captures the spirit of rock and roll like video, bothers me. It is an insult to every painting, every drawing, every photograph ever rendered after the human body, as if to say that only a video could capture life as it really is. Not true. What better way to exemplify the spirit and life than to capture it in that one moment and beauty in a single frame? And this guy really needs to do his research. His breakdown of Penny's photo, where she describes Paul Simon on this, she says he's swinging his guitar, his bass by the neck in a blur of Dionysian catharsis. What could such sacrificial actions mean beyond the obvious theatrical expression? Well, first of all, he's not swinging it, he's smashing it. And my understanding is that it was because he felt unfulfilled with the show, and in the end, he just released that anger by breaking his bass. He didn't do it for theatricality or for publicity. It was meant for just what it was. It wasn't about built-up fury. It was about achieving that last state of euphoria by releasing his energy. Anyway, that's my take on it. The Times needs to get on their game and have some proficient writers. This article was a mess with no clear thesis. And that's my opinion. And I'm reading hers because I could go on for an hour. Right. A lot of the photographers on the show, we were on the phone with each other, but I really think that Ashley summed it up pretty well.
Actually, I don't think the museum has ever had a show that has had such buzz. It's all over the internet. Almost everything is positive. And the Times article starts by saying, this is a really interesting show, you should go. So it's not negative, except we, all three of us, and all 105 photographers, feel so passionately about the still image and the importance of the still image, and maybe slowing things down in a very sped up world. So this is why we're having this little discussion now. What about Justin? What do you think?
Well, honestly, it's very simple. It's just this guy's opinion, and raised a lot of, commotion, but I could think of a dozen of Bob's images off the top of my head that resonate. How many videos? Okay, this videos you like, but do they come through your head? There's nothing that sticks like an image.
Okay. I'd like to open it up for questions. Would anybody like to ask any questions? And is there a microphone that's going to be passed around? No? Then you better just speak loudly. Okay.
Have you ever worked with Annie Leibovitz, and how do you see yourself different from her and part of the people you photograph?
I actually met Annie. The question is about have I ever worked with Annie Leibovitz. I met her in the 70s when she was a journalist working for Rolling Stone. She was doing a story with Ike and Tina Turner, and I was there then. And she said to me that she likes to photograph somebody and expose some part of their personality that they like to keep hidden. And I said that I do the exact opposite. And I try to photograph somebody as they want to be seen. In fact, she took a picture of Ike Turner that in his private study when he asked her not to. She published it. He threatened to break her legs. I told him not to. That's another story. But I admire Annie for what she's done. She's a great photographer. Certainly her advertising work, it's very difficult to do what she does. And, but nowadays with digital, Annie actually creates her pictures almost like a painting where there are many different images blended together. It's not just one photo. But there's a lot more of that happening nowadays. I forget the name of the guy who did the Madonna picture upstairs. But it's fantastic.
Andreas Gursky.
And that's about 15 different images. The picture of Madonna with a whole audience all around her. But that's the way things are done nowadays. It's a digital world. You get with the program.
And one of the important things about Annie Leibovitz is she started out with a 35 millimeter camera, and her career, she's really done it all from the most basic snapshots to the most complicated digital.
You got a great one of her. Upstairs is a picture that Annie did of Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley, which really kind of captures the spirit of rock and roll after the show when all the groupies are coming on to them. She's a very good journalist.
And it's about this big. It's a vintage print.
But it's great. It's double page in the book. Get the book.
Any other questions? Back there? But you're going to have to speak loudly, project.
So it sounds like you're really close to your subject. Have you ever found it difficult to delineate a line with professionalism, or is that just not even?
So the question was, and for Justin and Bob, you're close. Okay. Do you want to repeat?
Yeah, I think the question is, since I've become such close friends, was there ever a delicate balance between being professional and being friends? You put the camera down when the drugs come out, you don't want to embarrass your friends. But no, because when you're friends with a musician, part of a musician or an artist's job is publicity and is promotion. And a lot of the ones that I became friends with, certainly John Lennon and Joe Strummer and David Johansen, are aware of their image. And having that image done right by somebody who understands them is something that they really want. So I never found it a problem to be friends with my subjects. In fact, it makes it a lot easier.
The exhibition, if you haven't seen it, is in some ways the anti-paparazzi view of celebrity, because the show's not really about celebrity, it's much more about creativity. It's gotten a little disgusting when photographers stick a lens up, Britney Spears' skirt, and that sells for a lot of money. Almost all the photographs in the exhibition come from a collaboration. The photographs were given, not stolen. And there's an integrity. I use the word integrity. I chose photographers whose work I think has integrity, people whose, I'm not saying every photographer was easy, but I think there's a truth to what they've done, and I respect it. Another question? In the front row?
How old are you?
Me? I just turned 64.
I'm younger.
You have children who are interested in photography?
Actually, my son is interested in photography. He took a class in college where they criticized him for his contrast and his focus, and he kind of lost interest at that point, which is one of my pet peeves that, you know, a lot of schools teach strict rules, and I never learned the rules. Actually, most of my life I felt bad that I didn't go to school for photography, but later after that happened to him, I felt lucky that I escaped without being criticized.
Right there, please. So, next, okay.
When you were talking before about the image, when I viewed the exhibit upstairs, as much as I went to the Hall of Fame, the Florida State, that these are the stories and pictures of our lives. We grew up with these, and they weren't front page stories. And some of us were involved in other things when they were happening. So just to see them makes it important as a memory. And that's how important still photography.
Thank you. And for me as a photographic historian, it is very, very important that some of the iconic images that we did grow up with, that we lived with, you know, in our teenage bedrooms, that the names of the photographers should now be known. These are not anonymous pictures. These are taken by men and women who have made a great cultural contribution. And that's what, you know, I was trying to do in the exhibition. You had a question back there?
Yeah, in an atmosphere where people are famous for being famous, have you, on part of you ever had to decline to take someone's picture and, you know, when you felt that you weren't inspired by their persona?
Paycheck is a paycheck.
I'm inspired by the paycheck.
Music, this has been a really hard exhibition to curate because, as Bob said, except for the photographers who themselves have become celebrities, so many music photographers have been cheated, have been ripped off, have been exploited. I mean, they have not had an easy time. And many of them were very defensive, thinking, I'm out to get them in some way. And when I said this show's about them as photographers, it's not about the people necessarily who's in the picture, because as Bob said, he photographed all kinds of bands, so did Justin, who never made it. How do you know when you're photographing a bunch of 19-year-olds if they're going to be around in 6 months? So I really wanted to find photographs that I felt were good enough to go into the larger history of photography. Not just music history, but have an important place. You know, I do books with the Man Rays and the Cartier-Bressons, and I did a speaking tour this week, and there's a photographer, Ed Culver, and I hung his photograph next to a Deanne Arbus. I think he's an LA hardcore punk photographer. He started to cry, you know, that his photograph was hanging next to a Deanne Arbus. Another question? Right there.
Either one of you ever wanted to be in a rock band?
I have no musical talent. That's one of the reasons why I started taking the pictures at my friends' shows, because I couldn't play in their bands. So I just wanted to contribute and took the pictures.
I used to play a little folk music in the early 60s, but then when the Beatles came in, all my friends started playing notes, and that got really complicated. And so I dropped out. I was once in the band, though. The Clash needed a bugle player, and I knew how to play the trumpet from high school, and I actually played a few shows to open the show with a bugle call. That's about as far as it got.
We're going to have to end now, but it's not a bad way of ending, because we often enter professions because we couldn't do something else. I wanted to be a photographer, not a writer.
I wanted to paint, actually. If I could paint, I wouldn't have been a photographer.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Oh,
yeah.
They both want to be painters. That's why they're good photographers.
Couldn't paint.
But they care. And we're going to do a book signing. I have the catalog for the exhibition downstairs. I'll be signing. Bob has his New York Dolls and his
The John Lennon New York.
We can answer a few questions afterwards, but I really want to thank my panelists, Justin Borucki, Bob Gruen. Thank you very And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
As long as we let him do most of the talking, it's okay.
I know, thank you so much.
You were